Have you ever heard the idea that every time an inmate's lips are moving, he's lying? Have you ever heard that before? That is actually what we could call an informal fallacy. It's an error in thinking. Now, nobody actually believes that every single person who is an inmate lies with everything they say. It's kind of a joke, but people use it in different ways. But to think that because somebody holds a certain status, a status of an inmate, to think that because they hold that status, they must be lying, that is an informal fallacy. That's what we're going to talk about today. That is an error in thinking. It's an ad hominem. This is a Latin word, ad hominem. It means that you're arguing against a person's character or status rather than arguing against what they're saying. So if you're talking to someone, you're explaining to them things you believe, maybe religious beliefs or political beliefs you hold, or you're trying to tell them what the weather is going to be tomorrow because that's what the news said. And they look at you and they say, well, you're an inmate, you must be lying, or you're an inmate, I can't trust you. They've committed an informal fallacy, an error in thinking. If somebody said to you, well, yeah, of course you think the justice system is flawed. You're an inmate. In other words, it doesn't matter if you present evidence to them. Maybe you present historical evidence or statistical evidence or some sort of legal evidence to show that maybe the system is flawed in one way or another. And they just write all of that off. They don't care what you have to say. They just say, well, of course you think the justice system is flawed. You're an inmate. In other words, they think because you're an inmate, you're somehow unnecessarily biased in a negative way toward the justice system, or as some people now call it, the legal system. When they do that, they are not dealing with any evidence or arguments you actually propose. All they're doing is looking at your status and saying, you can't be right. Nothing you say can be right. That is an informal fallacy. It's a thinking error. Here's another informal fallacy or another thinking error. It's called in Latin tucoque or tucoque. I never know how to pronounce it correctly. I hear it in different ways. Anyway, it's the Latin word for you too. If I were to say, look, you really need to stop smoking, it's bad for your health, and then I present evidence from different scientific research and evidence that shows that smoking causes cancer, it's bad for your health, you should really stop. Rather than dealing with the evidence I gave you, rather than pointing to the research I showed you, you just say, well, you smoke too. Okay, think about it for a second. It doesn't matter what I do. If I'm telling you, you should stop smoking because there's scientific evidence that shows you it causes cancer and it's bad for your health, then it doesn't matter what I do. What you should be worried about is whether the evidence I'm providing to you is legit. It doesn't matter what I do. Another popular thinking error or informal fallacy is called the straw man. The straw man is when someone misrepresents what you've said. They exaggerate what you've said, right? So they're not actually addressing your beliefs, your ideas, your argument. They're exaggerating it and distorting it in a way, and then they think they've defeated it, but they haven't, because they haven't actually dealt with what you said. So this happens all the time. And again, when we talk about these thinking errors, it's really important to think about them in political and religious discussions, because those are the most heated. So let's think about gun rights controversies. Whenever there's a school shooting or something like that, everybody gets in an uproar about what we should do about it. Some say that there should be stricter gun laws. Some say that we should not worry about stricter gun laws, but there's some other remedy for it. If I am on the side of people who say we shouldn't enact stricter gun laws, that's not going to solve the issue, and then you respond, oh, so you must hate children. That is literally not what I said. If I try to make an argument as to why we shouldn't enforce stricter gun laws, and I give you evidence as to why I don't think that's going to help the issue, and then your response is, oh, you must hate children then, you have not dealt with anything I said. Maybe I do hate children, but that's not what I said. That's a separate argument. You got to deal with what I actually said. You hear this stuff on the news all the time. Somebody disagrees with an argument, then they mischaracterize it. They exaggerate it. And that's not dealing with the argument. It's just making up something that maybe people might laugh at, maybe people like to hear better because it's more provocative. There are dozens of informal fallacies. There are hundreds of ways that our thinking can go wrong. So I gave you an example of a straw man, when someone distorts, exaggerates what you've actually said, and then they think they win the argument because they responded to an exaggerated form of the argument. I talked about the "you too" argument. If I try to tell you that you should stop smoking and then you say, well, you smoke, pointing out my hypocrisy is not winning the argument. Or if I talk about the ad hominem argument, where I point out something about your character or your status and then write off everything you've said. Those are informal fallacies. They are incorrect ways of argument, and there are dozens of them. I'm going to elaborate on more of these informal fallacies in later videos, but I just want to say a few things about informal fallacies. Number one, they're just errors in thinking, and we all commit them. We all do them, right? We're all guilty of committing informal fallacies in our argumentation and in our discussions, all of us. We go wrong in our thinking because we're just limited in our intelligence, we're limited in our education, we're limited in all sorts of things. To commit an informal fallacy doesn't mean that you're dumb, uneducated, or unintelligent. Intelligent, well-educated, smart people commit informal fallacies all the time. It has more to do with your psychology and your rationality, which is something separate that we'll also discuss. So don't get the idea that if someone calls you on an informal fallacy, that it has anything to do with being dumb, uneducated, or unintelligent. Also, when you see it in other people, don't make the assumption, don't make the judgment that because they've committed an informal fallacy, that they're dumb, uneducated, or unintelligent. And this leads me to the next important point. Learning about informal fallacies will literally transform the way you think. I mean, if you don't walk away with too much from this course in critical thinking, I hope you would at least understand what's going on with informal fallacies. When you begin to learn or memorize the dozens of informal fallacies, you will be able to recognize it in other people's speech. You'll be able to recognize it in books you read. You'll be able to recognize them in the newspaper. You'll be able to recognize it in conversations you have on TV, on the radio, in visitation with your family. It will literally transform the way that you hear people, the way that you communicate with people. And if you happen to point out to others that they've committed some informal fallacy, they're not going to like it. They're not going to appreciate it. Think about it. When someone tells you that you've committed some error in thinking, that you're illogical or irrational, you don't take it too kindly. And so also when you point it out to others, it's literally going to transform the way that you understand the world. But when you point it out to people, they won't appreciate it. And so don't take the learning of these informal fallacies as a way to just win arguments and show people that they're stupid. You would be abusing the use of informal fallacies in a way that I've already discussed when we talked about weak sense and strong sense critical thinking. And that leads to the real issue. We often make use of informal fallacies in our argumentation because we like to win arguments. And using them is an easy way to win arguments, especially if the other person doesn't understand what's going on. So we just, as human beings, we like to win arguments. That's just how we're built. That's just how our psychology works. We like to win arguments. We like to sound smart. And so informal fallacies are like cutting corners. It's a way to cheat and win an argument if the other person doesn't know what's happening. When I learned about these things, I started to pay attention to arguments, and informal fallacies are something like giving a name to something you've always thought was wrong, but you couldn't put your finger on it. Sometimes when you're in an argument, you realize, I don't understand how to respond to this person, but something's wrong with what they're saying. Well, with that something wrong, the thing you can't put your finger on is probably an informal fallacy of some kind. And when you start to learn them, you start to learn the names for them, the definitions and examples. It'll help you start to understand people and think clearer. Another thing to understand is that we do this unconsciously. So you may have never heard of the term informal fallacy until today. It's not like you learned it in kindergarten or first grade. It's not like you learned it at the house. As humans, The way we think and process information, we come up with these things on our own. We often do it unconsciously. In fact, the majority of the time, we do it unconsciously. Very few people will commit an informal fallacy on purpose so that they can win an argument. Now, as you learn these things, you might be able to do that, but you would be the weak sense kind of critical thinker and debater. You would be doing it so you win arguments, not because you're seeking the truth. So just to sum up, informal fallacies are thinking errors. They're ways that we go wrong in our thinking. All of us do them quite a bit. It doesn't mean we're dumb, uneducated, or unintelligent. And learning about them will help prevent you from doing it in your own arguments and thinking, and it'll also help you see it in others. But most people do this unconsciously. Most of us are not aware of the fact that we're doing this, which is again why it's important to learn this. But keep in mind that pointing it out to other people will not always be appreciated, and it might make things worse. So you have to be a good judge and be wise about how you make use of this newfound knowledge. And I think that if you don't learn very much about anything going on with critical thinking in this course, you at least walk away understanding what's going on with informal fallacies. We as human beings are imperfect thinkers. We go wrong in all sorts of ways, and informal fallacies are the kind of ways we go wrong, and we've just made lists of them over the past couple of thousand years. There are dozens and dozens of them, and learning about them will literally transform the way that you think about the world.